Let's take a look at how we can add expenses, checks and transfers to QuickBooks through the online banking feed. So if I go to banking on the left and banking, we'll see here in the for review section we've got a number of transactions in our spend world. We may well identify a transaction. I've got a transaction here for Webco where we might want to add that particular £30 transaction into QuickBooks. So if Webco is not a company where we get credit, so we've not entered a bill which we are then going to match to because we don't get credit from this company, potentially we've gone to spend the £30 online or through a debit card, so there's no period of credit, so we know that there's no bill or bill payment to link to. We'd want to add the transaction. So we go to the transaction under the add option. You'll see here we've got three possibilities here. So we've got expense, we've got a check we can add, or a transfer that we can add in. So just to clarify, expense and check actually perform the same action in QuickBooks. They perform the same transaction in accounting sense, but expense will have a reference number and check will have a check number. So unless you're issuing checks from your checkbook, it's going to typically be expense that you would pick for an immediate payment that you're adding in from the bank feed. So expense is certainly the more popular option. Check tends to be very, very limited these days. So expense would typically be the selection that we would pick in this case, where we've perhaps spent the £30, as I say, debit card, or perhaps through the online banking. There's certainly no period of credit involved. The other option is to transfer, so we could put a transfer in if this was a transfer between bank accounts, but as it isn't, in this case, expense is the appropriate option. I'm going to go for expense there. I pick the supplier. If the supplier doesn't exist in your existing list, you can add from here, so you can actually add a supplier from within the bank feed. And the category wise, equally you'll look for the category that suits that kind of expenditure. So I'm going to just type web in here because I've got an expense code for IT and web costs. If you can't find a particular code, again, we've got options. You can go and pick from the codes that way if you're looking for a code that fits the particular expenditures. But I'm going to go for IT and web costs in this instance. And from a VAT point of view, we'd look at the documentation for that £30. We may find that there's VAT to claim back. We may find that it's an exempt supplier. So in this case, let's say it's an exempt supplier. So I can go and put exempt purchase in there. It will ask me whether I want to default for future IT and website costs to be exempt. Now it could be exempt, there could be another company that I buy services from in that category which is VAT registered. So in this instance I wouldn't really want to default to say every time pick exempt. So no would be the answer to that. I want to pick my VAT code depending on the supplier, depending on the paperwork provided to me. So that's the expense that we've added in there. Once we're happy with the details there, we can click add, and that will have added the expense into our QuickBooks file. If we want to check that entry, if I go to the little looking glass at the top here, the last entry in there you can see is the one we just generated for Webco. I'm going to click on that and it will bring up the form that we've created. So we've created an expense. You can see it's got reference number here, not check number, and we could populate that with a reference for the paperwork if required. But that's populated for me the form that I was looking to achieve, and I've got there through the little blue marker the link to the downloaded transaction from the bank, so I know it's come from the bank feed. So that's adding an expense, but you can equally add checks, you can equally add transfers through the bank feed.